The dojo was my sanctuary, until a black belt tried to choke the life out of me, thinking I was just another white belt to humiliate. He quickly learned that some lessons are taught not with honor, but with the brutal snap of a bone. The dojo was my sanctuary. It smelled like sweat, clean, pine, and determination. I started coming here 6 months ago, after an incident in a parking garage that left me with a permanent looking over my shoulder flinch and a deep-seated fear of enclosed spaces. I wasn't there to become a warrior. I was there to reclaim my own shadow, to feel safe in my own skin again. I was a white belt, the lowest of the low, and I was fine with that. I was learning. I was growing stronger, and for the first time in a long time, I was starting to feel whole. But every sanctuary has its serpent, and ours was named Leo. Leo was a third-degree black belt whose dad was basically best friends with Sensei Tanaka. He'd been in the dojo since he was old enough to walk, and he wore his belt like a crown. To him, the rest of us were just peasants in his kingdom of karate. He was condescending, arrogant, and had a special kind of disdain for me. I was one of only 3 women in the adult class, and the only black woman. He'd call me sweetheart during drills, or little tiger when I managed to land a clean strike. He'd correct my form by putting his hands on me for just a second too long, his smirk telling me he knew exactly what he was doing. I complained to Sensei Tanaka once, but he just waved it off. Leo is passionate, he'd said. He pushes everyone to be better. It is the way of Bushido. I learned quickly that the way of Bushido, at least in this dojo, meant putting up with Leo's garbage. So I did. I kept my head down, I focused on my katas, and I channeled my frustration into my punches. My progress was fast. I was focused, dedicated, and I had a deep well of motivation Leo couldn't possibly understand. And the better I got, the more he seemed to resent it. His accidental sweeps became a little harder, his blocks a little more forceful. He saw my growing confidence not as a good thing, but as a challenge to his authority. The day it all happened started like any other. We bowed in, went through our warm-ups, and practiced our kicks until our legs felt like jelly. Then Sensei Tanaka clapped his hands, his voice echoing in the large room. "All right, everyone, pair up. We will practice newaza, ground techniques. Focus on escapes from common chokes and holds." My stomach immediately turned to ice. There was an odd number of us today. I knew, with the kind of sinking certainty you get right before the world falls out from under you, who my partner would be. "Leo," Sensei said, gesturing to him, "you will work with her. Show her the finer points of the rear naked choke defense. Be gentle. She is still new." Leo's grin was predatory. "Of course, Sensei. I'll be very educational." We moved to a clear space on the mats. The other pairs spread out, their murmurs and the soft thud of bodies hitting the mat filling the air. But for me, it was like all that sound was sucked into a vacuum. There was only Leo kneeling in front of me, cracking his knuckles. "Okay, sweetheart," he said, his voice a low drawl. "Turn around. Let's start with you on the defensive." I did as I was told, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew this was a bad idea. Every instinct screamed at me to get up and walk out. But I saw Sensei Tanaka watching from the corner of my eye. If I backed down, Leo would see it as a victory. He would own me. So I knelt there, my back to him, and waited. His arm snaked around my neck faster than I could react. One arm slid under my chin, the crook of his elbow pressing hard against my windpipe. His other hand came up to lock onto his own bicep, cinching the hold tight. It was a textbook rear naked choke. It was also applied with way too much force for a simple demonstration. "The key," he whispered, his hot, stale breath in my ear, "is to tuck your chin and turn your head to create space. Try it." I tried. I strained against his arm, but it was like trying to move a steel bar. He was toying with me. Panic started to flicker in the edges of my mind. "Can't do it," he taunted softly. "That's because I have perfect form. When it's locked in like this, you have 2 options. One is to tap out." He squeezed a little harder, and my vision swam. "Go on, tap my arm. Show me you understand." My hand flew up, and I tapped his forearm. Once, twice, 3 sharp, desperate slaps. The universal signal to stop. Leo didn't let go. Instead, he squeezed harder. The flicker of panic became a raging fire. I couldn't breathe. Black spots started to dance in front of my eyes. I could hear him chuckle, a low, guttural sound right next to my ear. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't educational. This was for him. This was punishment for daring to get better, for daring to exist in his space. This was fun. "See?" he hissed, his voice the only thing I could hear over the roaring in my ears. "Not so tough now, are you? All that fire, and one little squeeze is all it takes." I tapped again, frantically this time, my slaps becoming weak and clumsy as the oxygen left my brain. The edges of the world were turning dark, the voices of the other students fading into a distant buzz. Sensei wasn't looking. No one was looking. It was just me and Leo, and the terrifying realization that he was not going to stop. My lungs burned. My head felt like it was going to explode. The last coherent thought that drifted through the fog was a memory. The cold concrete of that parking garage, the feeling of utter helplessness, the exact feeling I had sworn I would never feel again. He thought he was choking a white belt. He thought he was putting a girl in her place. As my vision narrowed to a single pinprick of light and the world went silent, my body, acting on an instinct far deeper than any dojo training, made its own move. My hands, which had been weakly clawing at his arm, found his left hand, the one he had clamped behind my head to anchor the choke. I felt his thumb pressing hard against my skull. He wasn't expecting a fight anymore. He was just enjoying the ride, and in that final, desperate moment, I hooked my fingers around his thumb, took a deep, primal grip, and pulled. A sound like a dry twig snapping echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my own head. It was sharp, distinct, and sickeningly final. The pressure on my windpipe vanished so abruptly that I collapsed forward onto the mat, the world exploding back into a dizzying kaleidoscope of color and light. I landed on my hands and knees, sucking in air that felt like fire and glass, my throat raw and convulsing. Every desperate gasp was a ragged tearing noise that seemed to fill the entire dojo. Then came the scream. It wasn't a kiai, the focused, powerful shout of a martial artist. It was a high-pitched, agonized shriek of pure, unadulterated pain. It was the sound of a bully who had just discovered that the world could, in fact, bite back. The world came rushing back in full, the distant sounds of other students' training cutting off instantly. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Leo was on his back, writhing on the mat and cradling his left hand to his chest. His face, which moments ago had been a mask of smug cruelty, was now pale, contorted in a grimace of agony. Tears were streaming from his eyes. His thumb was bent back at an angle that defied all natural anatomy. The dojo was dead silent. 20 pairs of eyes were on us, wide with shock and confusion. No one moved. It was a tableau, the weeping black belt and the gasping white belt. Sensei Tanaka was there in an instant, his bare feet slapping softly on the mat. He didn't come to me. He didn't ask if I was okay, even as I was still hacking and trying to fill my oxygen-starved lungs. He knelt beside Leo, his face a mask of furious concern. "Leo, what happened? What is it?" "My thumb," Leo wailed, his voice cracking. "She broke my thumb. Look at it." He held up his hand, and a wave of nausea rolled through me. It was worse than I thought. The bone was clearly dislocated, maybe even shattered. Sensei Tanaka's head snapped towards me. His eyes, usually calm and wise, were cold, hard chips of obsidian. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I struggled to find my own voice, which came out as a hoarse, broken whisper. He was choking me," I rasped, pointing a trembling finger at Leo. I tapped 3 times. He wouldn't let go. My throat felt like it was closing up all over again, this time with indignation and fear. I couldn't breathe. "She's lying," Leo sobbed, a pathetic and utterly unconvincing performance. "We were practicing the hold just like you said, Sensei. She just freaked out. She panicked and grabbed my hand and just snapped it. For no reason. She's crazy." I stared at him, dumbfounded. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. He had been suffocating me for his own sick amusement, and now he was painting himself as the victim. I looked at Sensei Tanaka, expecting, praying, for him to see through the obvious deception, to see the marks that were surely already forming on my neck, to see the genuine terror in my eyes versus the crocodile tears of his prized student. I saw none of that. I saw only disappointment and anger, all of it directed at me. He stood up slowly, his posture rigid. He looked down at me, still on my hands and knees, like I was something he'd found stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "In this dojo we practice control," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "Control of our bodies, our tempers, our fear. A black belt, a senpai, was instructing you. He had you in a hold you could not escape. Instead of calmly accepting the lesson, you responded with undisciplined, brutish force. You have injured him severely." "But he wouldn't let go," I cried, my voice finally returning, shaking with a fury that was starting to eclipse the fear. "He was hurting me." "Enough!" Sensei Tanaka barked. The entire class flinched. He pointed a finger at me. "There is a difference between training and assault. What you did was an assault. You have dishonored yourself, and you have dishonored this dojo." He took a deep breath, his chest puffing out. He looked from Leo, now being helped to his feet by 2 other students, to me, alone on the floor. A decision had been made. This cannot go unanswered. Your lack of control is a danger to others. It must be corrected. He walked to the center of the mat, turning to address the entire silent class. "Leo's injury is proof that she has power, but no discipline, so we will give her a chance to demonstrate it properly." He turned his icy gaze back to me, and the words he spoke next froze the blood in my veins. "Next week you will face him, here, in front of everyone. There will be no points, no time limits. The match ends only with a clear submission. You will fight a 3rd-degree black belt, and we will see just how well your brute force serves you then. Consider it your final exam." My world tilted on its axis. A match? Against Leo? It wasn't a test. It was a public execution. He wanted to humiliate me, to make an example of me for daring to defend myself. I looked around at the faces of my classmates. Some stared at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. Others looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. Not a single person spoke up. Not one. In their eyes I saw Sensei's judgment reflected back at me. I was the problem, the uncontrolled, crazy woman who had broken their golden boy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them what it felt like to have the life squeezed out of you, to know with chilling certainty that the person doing it was enjoying it. I wanted to tear off my collar and show them the bruising that was already starting to blossom on my neck, but I knew it wouldn't matter. The narrative had been set. Leo was the victim, and I was the aggressor. My chin trembled, but I forced it up. My pride wouldn't let me crumble in front of them. I got to my feet, my legs unsteady. "I quit," I said, my voice surprisingly firm, cutting through the thick silence. Sensei Tanaka's lips curled into a thin, knowing smile. "Of course you do," he said dismissively. "The weak always run when faced with a true challenge. Go. We have no room for cowards here." His words were meant to sting, to brand me with shame as I walked out the door. And they did. But as I walked to the changing room, the sting was quickly being replaced by a cold, hard rage. He thought I was running because I was scared. He wasn't entirely wrong. The thought of facing Leo, sanctioned by a sensei who clearly despised me, was terrifying. But that wasn't the reason I was quitting. I was quitting because this place, my supposed sanctuary, was a lie. Its honor was a sham. Its code of Bushido was just a convenient shield for a good old boys' club that protected its own. I changed out of my GI in a daze, my hands shaking so badly I could barely tie my shoes. When I walked out of the dojo, I didn't look back. The evening air felt cool against my hot face. I sat in my car for a long time, the furious adrenaline from the fight giving way to deep, shuddering sobs. The parking garage incident had broken my trust in strangers. This had broken my trust in a place I had learned to call home. For 2 days I stewed. I replayed the event over and over in my head. I felt the phantom pressure of Leo's arm on my throat, heard the sickening snap of his thumb, saw the cold condemnation in Sensei Tanaka's eyes. I cycled through rage, fear, and a profound sense of injustice. They had twisted everything. They had made my self-preservation into a crime. And the idea of them getting away with it, of Leo returning to the dojo, a hero with a bandaged hand and a story to tell about the crazy white belt, ate away at me. Running felt like letting them win. It felt like admitting that I was what they said I was: weak, undisciplined, a coward. On the third day, I woke up with a new feeling. Not rage, not fear, but a quiet, unyielding resolve. Sensei Tanaka had called it my final exam. Fine, so be it. He wanted to see brute force. He wanted a demonstration of my lack of control. I would give them a demonstration, all right. But it wouldn't be the one they were expecting. I spent the next 4 days preparing. I didn't go back to the dojo, of course. My first call was to my cousin, Marcus. Marcus was ex-army, a combat medic turned MMA coach. He ran a gritty, no-frills gym in a warehouse district on the other side of town. It smelled like bleach and iron, a stark contrast to the dojo's pine and incense. I walked in and told him everything. I didn't cry. I laid out the facts, my voice low and steady. When I finished, he didn't say anything for a long moment. He just looked at the dark, ugly bruises that now circled my neck like a gruesome necklace. Okay, he said, his voice a low rumble. A no-rules, submission-only match against a third dan karateka who outweighs you by 40 pounds and has a vendetta. You have 4 days. He cracked his neck. Let's get to work. Those 4 days were the most grueling of my life. Marcus didn't train me in karate. He said my karate was the last thing I should rely on. Karate is a sport of rules and honor, he'd grunted while wrapping my hands. You're not walking into a sport. You're walking into a fight. You need to unlearn the rules. He didn't teach me katas. He taught me dirty, efficient, fight-ending techniques. We didn't practice point sparring. We practiced breaking posture, controlling the clinch, and finding submissions from impossible positions. He taught me the brutal simplicity of a Brazilian jiu-jitsu triangle choke. He showed me how to use my opponent's weight and momentum against him, how a well-applied joint lock could neutralize a size and strength advantage instantly. He wasn't training me to be a student. He was training me to be a predator. By the end of the 4th day, my body was a canvas of aches and bruises, but my mind was sharp. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was different now. It was focused. It was fuel. The night of the exam arrived. I walked back into that dojo not as a disgraced white belt, but as something else entirely. I wore my gi, my white belt tied neatly around my waist. The entire class was there, lining the walls, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and anticipation. Sensei Tanaka sat in his formal seiza position at the head of the mat, his expression unreadable. And then Leo walked out. His left hand was in a heavy black cast, his thumb immobilized. But his right hand was free, and the smirk on his face was back, uglier than ever. He saw my white belt, and his smirk widened. This was his coronation. This was the moment he would re-establish his dominance. He bowed to Sensei, then turned and gave me a mock bow, dripping with condescension. I bowed back, my expression perfectly neutral. Sensei Tanaka clapped his hands once. Hajime, begin. Leo didn't hesitate. He came at me fast, aggressive, just as I knew he would. He wasn't thinking about technique. He was thinking about punishment. He threw a furious flurry of punches, expecting me to cower and cover up like a novice. But I didn't. I weathered the storm, moving my head, parrying with my forearms, letting him punch himself out. His cast made his left side useless for anything but a clumsy block. He was a one-sided fighter, all power and rage. He grew frustrated. He lunged in for a grab, wanting to manhandle me, to throw me to the ground. And that was the moment I had been waiting for. That was the trap Marcus and I had set. As he reached for me, I didn't resist. I didn't back away. I moved in. I stepped inside his reach, ducking under his wild right haymaker and wrapping my arms around his torso in a classic body lock. The move was so unexpected, so contrary to every karate instinct, that he froze for a split second. It was all the time I needed. I hooked my leg behind his and drove my weight forward, using his own momentum to send us both crashing to the mat. I landed on top, in side control, my shoulder driving hard into his jaw. A collective gasp went through the room. This wasn't karate. This was something else, something primal and efficient. Leo struggled, bucking and trying to push me off, but it was like trying to shrug off a lead blanket. Marcus had spent hours drilling this with me, making me hold the position against bigger, stronger men until my muscles screamed. I was immovable. "Get off me," Leo grunted, his face turning red with exertion and humiliation. He tried to frame against my neck with his good hand, but I shifted my weight, trapping his arm between my body and his. Now his only functional weapon was gone. He was helpless. I looked up for a moment and met Sensei Tanaka's eyes. The stoic mask was gone. His face was a storm of disbelief and dawning horror. He was seeing his carefully constructed world of kata and dojo etiquette being dismantled by something he didn't understand. He thought he was sanctioning a beatdown. He was witnessing a dissection. I didn't gloat. I didn't say a word. I simply moved. With his right arm trapped, I slid my knee over his belly, moving into a full mount position. The most dominant position in ground fighting. Now I was sitting on his chest, my weight pinning him completely. The panic in his eyes was glorious. The bully, the black belt, was utterly and completely neutralized by a white belt. He thrashed beneath me, a fish on a hook. "This isn't a real fight," he spat, his voice filled with venomous denial. "You're not supposed to do this." "Sensei said submission only," I replied, my voice calm and even. It was the first thing I'd said. The sound of it, so steady and controlled, seemed to unnerve him more than anything else. I leaned forward, putting my full weight on his chest, making it hard for him to breathe. With his one good arm pinned, I had my pick of targets. I could have gone for an armbar. I could have rained down punches. But that wasn't the point. This wasn't about hurting him. It was about showing him and everyone else in that room what true control looked like. My hands went to his collar. My left hand slid deep into his GI, grabbing a fistful of fabric by the side of his neck. My right hand went across his throat, gripping the opposite lapel. I settled my weight, sinking low, and began to tighten my grip. It was a simple cross-collar choke. One of the first things you learn. And against a panicked, flailing opponent with no defense, it was as final as a guillotine. The pressure wasn't on his windpipe, it was on the carotid arteries on either side of his neck. It didn't feel like his crude, brutish choke. It was a clean, precise, and inescapable constriction of blood to the brain. His eyes went wide as he realized what was happening. He bucked again, harder this time, a surge of pure, animal terror. It did him no good. I was locked in. His face began to turn a deep, dusky purple. His one free hand, the one in the cast, started to weakly slap against my back. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't let go. I held the choke, watching the arrogance drain from his face, replaced by the same primal fear I had felt when he was choking me. I saw him remember what it felt like to have the world go dark. I held it for 1 second, 2, 3. The exact same number of times I had tapped on his arm. I wanted him to feel it. I wanted him to understand. Then, just as his eyes began to roll back in his head, I released the pressure. He coughed and sputtered, greedily gulping in air. The fight was gone. The bully was broken. All that was left was a terrified man pinned to the floor. And now, for the first time, he spoke to me not as sweetheart or little tiger, but as an equal, or maybe even a superior. "Please," he rasped, his voice a pathetic, broken thing. "Mercy. Please." I stared down at him, at the man who had shown me none. I saw Sensei Tanaka on his feet, his mouth hanging open. I saw the stunned faces of the other students. I had won. But it wasn't the victory that mattered. It was the proof. Slowly I got up. I didn't offer him a hand. I walked to the center of the mat and bowed formally to Sensei Tanaka. Then I turned, walked to my bag, and began to untie my white belt. I folded it neatly. I placed it on the floor in front of the dojo's main entrance, the traditional way of signifying you are leaving and never coming back. As I walked out the door for the last time, I didn't feel rage or sadness. I felt a profound and powerful peace. I hadn't needed a dojo to feel safe in my own skin. I hadn't needed a sensei to grant me permission to be strong. Everything I needed, I already had. They wanted to give me a final exam, and I had passed. I left them in the ruins of their own making, in a silent dojo with a weeping black belt and a sensei who had just learned that the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with brute force, but the one you have completely, utterly underestimated